Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. One question that I get asked quite often as a true crime content creator is where do I find all of the cases that I cover? The story of how I found today's case pretty much says it all. So, recently I noticed that one of the pans that I used to cook with, the non-stick on the bottom of the pan was starting to come away. Now, the pans are not even a year old. I literally only bought them last June or last July in preparation of moving into my first house, just as a little bit of a treat, because apparently pots and pans is the type of thing I treat myself to. So I wondered if I had a warranty on them. I rang Ninja to inquire about the warranty and potentially getting a replacement. Now I ended up being on hold with them for almost 20 agonizing minutes. So while I was waiting, I was just reading through some articles, going from one website to the next and the next and the next, when I came across an article about this case, which is a case that I have never heard anything like. And just like that, I was engulfed. I had to know everything, and I knew that I had to share it with all of you. So today we are going to be covering the kidnapping of Jerry Martin. Gerald Jerry Martin was one of 5 children from his parents Nancy and Harold, his siblings ranging from 11-year-old to 6 months old. Harold worked as a maintenance man at Madison Square Garden, not the one that's there now though, this was an older building. Jerry lived with his father and siblings at 725 11th Avenue, Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, which is a 5-story apartment building. Looking at the recent listings in the building, the apartments do look quite nice, but quite quaint. I imagine it was a bit of a squeeze with Harold and all of the children. Nancy, their mum, didn't live with the children as she and Harold had separated, and it was quite a nasty separation they went through, so I don't know if or how often she got to see the children, because again, they were all left with Harold. It was a sunny, warm day in Manhattan, New York, on the 7th of July 1945, when 3-year-old Jerry was out riding his bike with his 6-year-old brother Tom. It was actually only 2 days away until Jerry's 4th birthday. Shortly before 5 p.m, Jerry and Tom are nearby the front of their home when a woman approached them, asking them if they wanted to go and get some sweets. Tom shook his head no, however Jerry excitedly said yes. The woman took Jerry by the hand, reassuring Tom that they would be back and that all he had to do was just wait there with the bikes, but they never were. That would be the last time that Tom ever saw his younger brother. He stood waiting with the bikes for quite some time before eventually Harold realised what had happened. He would wander around the neighbourhood for hours searching for his son with the help of friends and neighbours, but to no avail. Jerry was gone. Initially, suspicion fell on Nancy, because who else would it be? Why would a stranger want to abduct their son? And it also seemed suspicious that this happened only days before his birthday. The search for Jerry was huge, spanning over 9 different states, stretching all the way to Maryland, almost 200 miles away, but they were never able to find him. Nancy would be ruled out of having any involvement. I don't know if they found her or if she came forward or what happened, but they were confident that she had nothing to do with the kidnapping. It did confuse me a bit on them thinking that Nancy did it, because Tom, who was also our son, was there, so surely he would have recognised the woman who was offering them sweets as his mum. Did they maybe think that Nancy had sent someone else to kidnap Jerry or something like that? I don't know. A lot of the official records surrounding this case would later, unfortunately, be lost in a fire. As the years went on, the kidnapping of Jerry was always like the elephant in the room, something that hung over the family. Despite finding a new wife and having more children, Jerry never left Harold's mind. It was said that he would often weep for his missing son. Harold, and then eventually Tom as he grew up, would often go to the police station to see if there were any updates, if there was any movement on the case, if there was anything that they could do to try and help track Jerry down, but they were always met with the same answer. No. For the rest of his life, Harold believed in his heart that Jerry was out there. He could feel his life. He knew that he wasn't dead, and all they needed to do was find him. Harold believed that until his final breath, and he was right. In 2017, 51-year-old Audrey Bell decided to do a 23andMe test. For anyone that doesn't know what 23andMe is, it is a biotechnology genetic testing company where you order a kit from their website online, it gets delivered to you, and using just your saliva, they're able to extract your DNA and give you a full report based on it. So from this, you can discover more about your heritage, ancestry reports, family trees, things such as that. That's just what I could find online because I've personally never done one, although I do remember when there was a huge hype around them. Audrey, who was a twin herself, is also a triplet mom, and she wanted to do the 23andMe kits, I'm guessing along with her children, to see the differences between the triplets' DNA, if they're identical, fraternal, stuff like that. Audrey would spit into the tube and send it off. When her results came back weeks later, something stuck out to her as a huge surprise. Growing up, Audrey was very proud of her Italian heritage. It formed part of her identity, and her dad, Richard Palmadesso, was also very proud and rooted in his Italian heritage. So when the results came back and it showed that Audrey had no Italian in her blood, it actually showed that she was more Irish, Scottish and Spanish, she was incredibly shocked. In conversation, she mentioned this to her father Richard and mother, and also her twin sister Cynthia McFadden, but at that time they didn't think too much into it or delve into it at all, which you will learn was very unfortunate. In 2019, Cynthia decided that she wanted to give the 23andMe a whirl, and her results were strikingly similar to Audrey in that there was no Italian heritage discovered. This time, the women were more serious about wanting answers to this. The perfect person to ask would be their dad, because Richard was where they thought their Italian heritage came from, but sadly he died in an accident 2 years prior in 2017, but after Audrey received her results. Richard Palmadesso didn't really have a close bond with any of his family, and so there was only really one person that Audrey and Cynthia could turn to. This was a cousin of their dad, one of his only living relatives who also happened to be named Richard. He agreed to help, and so he took one of the DNA tests, and lo and behold, this confirmed that they weren't related, they weren't family, they didn't share any DNA. This is when the women learned that it was an open secret on their dad's side of the family that Richard, their dad, wasn't biologically part of their family. It seemed that everybody knew apart from him. According to his birth certificate, Richard Palmadesso was born on the 31st of May 1943 in Staten Island, New York, to Isabel and Angelo Palmadesso. Richard was the first child that the couple shared. Isabel, who was already in her 40s, had 2 other children from a previous marriage who were in their 20s. Growing up, Richard was very shy, reserved and anxious. Isabel and Angelo weren't the most loving, nurturing parents. Angelo, who served in World War II, was a violent alcoholic, and Isabel was very strict. She would constantly silence Richard. Even when sat at the dinner table, he was rarely allowed to talk. Isabel died when Richard was 12 years old, and almost immediately, because he either didn't want to or he couldn't look after Richard, Angelo sent him away to live with his uncle, Jack Palmadesso. He stayed there until after he graduated high school, and after moving out, he had next to no contact with any of his family. Even as he began his own life, developing his career and beginning his own family, the Palmadesos weren't bothered about keeping in touch or checking in. Angelo died when Richard was 27 years old. Audrey and Cynthia would learn about a family rumour that it went about the family, which was about Richard and where he actually came from. Again, it was like an open secret that he wasn't biologically related. Helen Horgan was a woman who worked as a nanny, a bit like a helping hand for the Palmadeso family. It was believed that Helen, who allegedly sometimes engaged in sex work, fell pregnant with a local gangster who she wasn't married to and had no intention of marrying. It's believed that Helen was Richard's biological mum and Isabel had taken him in so that Helen wasn't shunned or anything like that. Richard and Helen seemingly did have a good relationship. Helen actually lived with Richard, his wife, and their daughters years later. Like I said, I've never done a 23andMe. I really don't know how it works, but when Cynthia received her results, she was able to access a different feature. Maybe she paid extra for it. This feature showed Cynthia that she had an unknown relative, someone who had also done a 23andMe kit. That relative was 79-year-old Tom Martin, who shared 22% of their DNA, meaning that he was either a grandfather or an uncle. As far as they knew, he definitely wasn't their paternal granddad. Angelo died in 1970, and because Richard wasn't open or in touch with his family, it wouldn't actually be outlandish to think that maybe he did have a brother that he just never mentioned. Cynthia and Audrey reached out to Tom through 23andMe, and they were blown away by what he told them. Tom hadn't taken the DNA kit to learn more about where he came from. He did it in an effort to find answers, to find a person, to find his little brother who was kidnapped 74 years ago. Audrey and Cynthia would fly out to Florida from New York to meet Tom around Thanksgiving in 2019. They would learn so much about Tom and just how similar he was to their late beloved father. Both men resembled each other. I have posted a picture of them both on the Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn for you to go and see for yourself. And the sisters also picked up on like little similarities, such as both of the men loved coconut cake and watching movies. Both of them loved acting and wanted to pursue careers within that industry. The women started to think, could their father, Richard Palmadeso, actually be missing, kidnapped Jerry Martin? There were tiny things that made them doubt. For instance, there was his birth certificate. Richard Palmadeso had a birth certificate, but I did read that back then in the early 1940s, they weren't monitored as heavily as they are now, and so that made them easily to forge or to replicate. There was also an age difference too. Jerry Martin was 2 years older than what they believed Richard Palmadeso to be. Despite how long it had been, Tom relayed the day of the kidnapping onto the sisters, and when they showed him a picture of Helen, the nanny, he thought it could have been her who offered the boys the sweets, took Jerry away by the hand, never to return, leaving him behind waiting with the bikes. After learning all of this, the sisters came up with a theory on what may have actually happened. In July 1945, when Jerry was kidnapped, Angelo was away serving in World War II. He had been deployed for about 2 years. It was thought, could Isabel have fallen pregnant before he left and sadly lost the baby, or lied to Angelo about pregnancy? With the end of the war looming, Isabel realised that she couldn't keep up this lie much longer. Angelo was going to be returning home soon and there was no son awaiting him. Could this have motivated her to travel across New York and kidnap a young boy out playing with his brother, or somehow convince Helen to do it for her? There are just so many questions that go along with this. If Isabel did fall pregnant and sadly lose her baby, why didn't she just admit that? I probably should have researched this earlier, but now I'm just thinking, if Angelo died in the war, would Isabel have gotten any sort of payout or anything like that? And if she did, would the payout have been higher if she and Angelo shared a child? Was she ever expecting Angelo to actually come home? Why was Jerry picked? Again, he was only 2 days off his 4th birthday, and Isabel needed a child who was around 2. How must those first few weeks and months have been for Jerry? At almost 4, you know who your mum and dad are, you know who your family are, and you know where you live, where your house is. So how scared and confused must he have felt? Being given a new name, being told that these two strangers are now his parents living in a house that he's unfamiliar with. Probably this is why Isabel forbade him from talking, and why Angelo seemingly held no affection towards him, knowing that he wasn't really his son. I don't know if Angelo was included or excluded from the open secret that Richard/Jerry wasn't biologically related to them. I also want to know, like, what did Isabel's friends and family think when a random child that she claimed as her own showed up? Is this where the lie about him being Helen's child came from? Did Isabel paint herself as a hero instead of a homewrecker who broke up the Martin family? Unfortunately, we may never get those answers. Jerry/Richard died 2 years before this revelation, which is why it was so unfortunate that back in 2017, when Audrey first got a result, they didn't pursue it further then. He could have got the chance to see his brother again. Without getting DNA from Jerry/Richard, they can't 100% confirm that they are one and the same, but they are. There's no other explanation, and this is what the sisters and Tom believe. This discovery sort of answers some of the questions that the women held about their dad's relationship with his own family. Jerry/Richard always felt like the odd one out, that he was disconnected and that he didn't belong, and all of this likely stemmed from the kidnapping. From the most recent reporting I could find, Audrey, Cynthia and Tom all stay in touch through phone calls, text messages and over social media. Tom loves to hear stories about his beloved younger brother, and that despite what happened to him, he found happiness in the form of his wife and children, bringing him long-awaited closure. Audrey would talk about Tom saying, quote, "He gets upset that they didn't find each other in time to meet again, but is happy knowing that my father had a family that loved and cared for him. He is certain that my dad is now finally back together with his real mother and father." Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Please make sure to follow the podcast wherever you're listening so that you will never miss an episode. Make sure to follow me on Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn, where I'll be posting images relating to today's case and for any and all updates. I will see you all in 2 weeks' time with another episode.